Good evening. Welcome to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, the largest institution in the United States devoted to the arts, science, and artists in movie making. The Academy Museum of Motion Pictures acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of the water and land on which we program, curate, educate, convene, and discuss. We honor and respect Tongva ancestors and the Tongva community today, which continue to nurture this land and water through traditional practice, activism, art, and education. We also acknowledge their continued work to safeguard cultural resources. My name is Robert Renaud, and I'm the specialist in the Film Programs Department here at the museum. Thank you for joining us in our David Geffen Theater for the Documentary Features Nominees panel, presented as part of our Oscar Week programming. Before we begin the panel, we'd like to note that public programming for 2023 Oscar Week is made possible by the Ruderman Family Foundation, which promotes authentic representation in the entertainment industry and full inclusion of people with disabilities throughout all sectors of society. I would also like to thank our ASL interpreters who will be assisting today. Their names are Felix Villarreal, Richard Loya, and Paula Morales. Now, please help me in welcoming to the stage Senior Vice President of Member Relations, Global Outreach, and Awards Administration, Tom Oyer.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you all for coming. I'm here representing the Member Relations and Awards team today. Today we are celebrating, obviously, our 5 documentary feature film nominees. And you might be asking, well, how did we get here? Well, I'll give you the breakdown of the process. The awards process involves a number of steps. The first step is the films need to qualify. In order for a documentary feature film to qualify, there's 2 methods to qualification. One is based off of its theatrical release in one of a number of our qualifying cities. A film can complete a 1-week qualifying run in order to be eligible. The other method is we have a qualifying festival process by which we have festivals from around the world where certain awards at those festivals make the films automatically eligible to be submit and be eligible in the category. The second step in the process, the films need to submit. There's a whole submission process. It's a fun time, let me tell you. And through that submission process, the films that are provided to the Academy, I want to give a special thank you to Michael Benedict, Laura McPhee, and many others on our team, the Academy team here, that helped make that entire submission process possible. All right, there we go. Thank you. So then once we get all our submissions, then there's the voting process. And this begins our lovely voting process with the documentary branch members. We provide films to the documentary branch members throughout the year as films are qualifying and submitting to us. There's different assigned viewing. There's a whole process by which they are watching all the films that are up for consideration in both of the documentary categories. Throughout that process goes into the fall, and then in December we have a short list of voting, first round of voting to determine a short list in December. That short list is 15 films in the category. From there, then we do a second round of voting in January to narrow down the 15 films to the 5 nominees today. 5 nominees that you have here today. Again, documentary branch members determine that those nominees. From there, then, we go out to the entire Academy membership. The entire membership votes on all 23 categories, determining the Oscar winner in each category, which you'll find out on Sunday. So I wanted to take a moment to just really thank all of the Academy members that put all their time in viewing films in all the different categories, but of course I'm thanking the documentary branch members for all the work they do. It's so appreciated and will continue to enlist your help every year. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce you 3 wonderful members of the documentary community who I have the pleasure of working with all year round, not just during Oscar season. The 3 documentary branch governors, Kate Amend, Chris Hedges, and Jean Shen.
Good evening. My name is Jean Chen. This is my 2nd year as the governor of the documentary branch. And on behalf of 650 documentary branch members, I want to thank Tom Oyer and Michael Benedict for all the hard work they do to keep us afloat. And I'm going to introduce our newest governor, Chris Hedges, legendary filmmaker.
Thank you, Jean. I'm the newest member, but probably one of the oldest persons working in film here. And I'm so honored to be part of the Academy and celebrate this awesome, talented group of filmmakers tonight who've made such inspiring films. And I'd like to introduce Kate Aman, who has served the Academy for 9 years, and this is her last event here at the Academy, and I'm really so grateful for all of her tutoring for me in the Academy.
Thank you, Chris and Jean and Tom and Michael. This is always such a wonderful night to celebrate the incredible documentaries that are nominated this year. I'm old enough to remember watching the Oscars with my mom and dad on our black and white television in the living room. And I also remember that in those days, the men all wore white tie and tails to the Oscars. But one, and Bob Hope was always the host, the MC, but one fond memory I have is this one time when Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas sang a song in their white tie and tails, did a little song and dance called "It's Great Not to Be Nominated." And they did a whole routine about not being nominated. Well, I'd like to say that it is great to be nominated. And these incredible filmmakers you're going to meet tonight have all produced masterpieces, really. These are incredible, powerful, important, impactful films. And the whole year has been very strong for documentaries. And there were some that were not nominated that were pretty wonderful too. But these 5 films are just stunning, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing from these brilliant filmmakers. So thank you. And I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight, who is Lerth Miller, who's the Associate Director of Film Programs here at the museum. So KJ.
Thank you so much, Chris, Jean, Kate. So this is the first year that we are presenting Oscar Week panels at the museum, and we are so excited to celebrate the Oscars and all our nominees here today in the David Geffen Theater, which I may be biased, but I think is the best movie theater in Los Angeles. Yeah, some people agree. So my name is Lerth Miller, and as the Associate Director of Film Programs here at the museum, it is my extreme privilege to be part of a wonderful team who together produce over 400 screenings each year, both in this space and in our wonderful Ted Mann Theater, all of which are, like today, presented for the public. Since I started my film career in the documentary nonprofit space, I, as a film programmer, remain dedicated to the preservation, the restoration, and the exhibition of, yes, cinema of all forms, but from any era, but really especially to shining a light on significant and underscreened documentary films from across cinematic history. We're thrilled to this summer be presenting a 3-month-long program that we're calling Summer of Music, which is dedicated to the rich history of the concert film, and that's just one of the examples of the ways in which the Academy Museum's film programs will continue to champion documentary films and filmmakers throughout our year-round programming, and tonight is no exception. For their support of the museum's exhibitions, programs, and numerous other initiatives, and in particular for helping to orchestrate Oscar Week here at the museum, I want to first thank Academy President Janet Yang and the Academy CEO Bill Kramer. I also want to thank the Academy Museum's President and Director Jacqueline Stewart, our Chief Audience Officer Amy Homa, Eduardo Sanchez, Silver Feldman, Christina Ybarra, Tom Oyer, and Dilcia Barrera. Thank you all for your tireless efforts and dedication to making this incredible week of celebrations possible. So before I bring out our nominees, I would like to ask our ASL interpreters to please take the stage. And now, please allow me to introduce our nominees for Best Documentary Feature Film. For Navalny, Daniel Roher, Odessa Ray, Diane Becker, and Melanie Miller. Also nominated for Navalny is Shane Boris. I would like to introduce Shane Boris as a producer of Navalny, as well as a producer of Fire of Love, along with the director, Sara Dosa, and producer, Ina Fichman. From A House Made of Splinters, Simon Lereng Wilmont and Monica Hellström. From All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, Yoni Golijov, John Lyons, Howard Gertler, and Nan Goldin. From All That Breathes, Shaunak Sen, Aman, Mann, and Teddy Leifer. Thank you all so much for being here this evening and for making these tremendous films, each of which is, I think, so much of this moment, and in others recall a not so distant past that is made ever more immediate by your thoughtful conjuring of these stories into relatable frameworks and contexts. And so I would like to start with the directors for each film and just ask how you came to your subjects. And I think in some cases this could be an overarching theme or event, and in others it's an individual. And we can start with All That Breathes.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. In our case, it actually began with an interest in thinking of air. And if you live in Delhi, you're always preoccupied with what you're breathing in a way. And I was also philosophically interested in thinking of human, non-human relationships. More than anything else, I think I was interested in a kind of tone or texture of a kind of vaporous smokiness. And this one time when Aman and I were in a car, and Aman suddenly looked a bit surprised. And we looked up and realized that we were seeing a bird falling off the sky. And in a way, that sort of nudged the film into some kind of existence. And then once we met the main characters in this small, cramped basement, it sort of takes on a life of its own. But I don't know, it's really difficult to talk about where it began. It began as a kind of interest in a texture of life in the city.
And for All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, I know Laura could not be here this evening, but perhaps Nan, if you would like to talk about finding Laura and starting to work together on this film.
So we started the film ourselves, the group Pain, for 1.5 years before Laura came on. And yeah, it was the three of us, there were 3 of us working constantly on the movie. So we had a lot of material and we hadn't really formatted it. And then Laura came on, and I was very scared of working with Laura Portress. I thought, I don't have any secrets, I don't have any big political secrets to reveal, and why is she interested in me? And it started as a film about pain, the group I started to fight the pharmaceutical companies and the families behind them, the family behind them. And then it branched out into work I had done during the AIDS crisis. I curated the first big show of about AIDS with 12 members of my community. And she became very interested in that, and I introduced her to some of the crucial people of the times that I grew up in, like David Wojnarowicz and Greer Langton and David Armstrong. And so the film started to evolve. Then during COVID, she would come over and interview me, and the interviews were very deep and penetrating, and she became interested in my sister, and that's how that evolved. So what's great about the film is the way she weaves the personal and the political together. And it's a real collaboration because I also worked on the material and had a lot of say in what was used. So it's kind of a collaborative film.
Yeah, and both of your voices are present. We sometimes hear her speaking and asking you questions, and your voice is obviously so present, especially in your slide presentations. For A House Made of Splinters, Simon, would you like to discuss how you, I guess, learned about this, I don't want to say orphanage, but rehabilitation center for these children in Ukraine?
Yeah, previous to this film, I made another documentary that was called The Distant Barking of Dogs, which is about a young boy living along with his grandma, right near the front line of the war in Ukraine. And during the filming of that film, I became very close to this odd but wonderful couple. And in the later stages of shooting that film, Alexandra, the grandmother, she became very ill with some heart problems. And I realized that there would be no one left to take care of the young kid, Oleg, if she were to pass away. Luckily, she didn't, and they're still going strong and living in the western parts of Ukraine now. But I kind of couldn't escape that question, is this a problem along the front line, that kids are left without anybody to take care of them? So I teamed up once again with my amazing local assistant director, Asad Safarov, and we began researching, and very quickly he actually came back and said, up near the northern parts of the then front line of the war, the city administration, they saw your film, and they're actually welcoming you, so we can go and research if you want to. And I went, and to make a long story short, I visited a lot of places, but the first time I opened the door into Margarita's shelter, it was just so obvious that there was something completely different going on. It was a little place, and it was worn out, but the younger kids were running around in a chaos and having fun, and there was a beautiful elderly lady trying to teach some of the girls music, even though she didn't really do music herself, I think. And at the end of the hallway was who I would later come to know as Margarita, and she was like fiercely hugging two kids while she was shouting angrily at some parent on the phone, and the whole place just, had this atmosphere of warmth and compassion and almost like a real home. And that was so different to the other places that I visited that I got very curious, and that's how the film started.
And I have another question for you later about specifically working with children, but Sara, I would love to hear how you first learned about Katya and Maurice.
Sure. First, I just want to say it's so wonderful to share this stage with all of you. I've had such a pleasure of listening to each and every one of you speak through this award season, and I'm just feeling a little emotional that we're nearing the end, so just thank you all for continuing this journey together. But yes, to answer your question, to pull myself back from emotion, for me, I'm just fascinated by stories similar to Shaunak about the human relationship with non-human nature, especially when there's a dimension of allegory or myth. And so that's always kind of in mind. And actually, when Shane and our editor from Fire of Love, Aaron Casper, and one of our producers, Elijah Stevens, who I believe are also in the audience today, when we were finishing up the last film that we made together, a film called The Seer and the Unseen, we came across Katya and Maurice. That's because that film is a verite documentary shot in Iceland, which is a volcanic island, and we think of it as a magically real documentary. We wanted to open it with imagery, archival imagery of erupting volcanoes that could really conjure this magical feeling of this land that was constantly in creation and destruction. So we began that process of archival research, and that's when we first learned about Katya and Maurice Kraft, because not that many people had filmed erupting volcanoes in Iceland. Once we saw the imagery, we were just instantly stunned by how gorgeous and surreal it was. But once we learned that they were a married couple, not just in love with each other, but also the earth, that's when we thought, wow, there's a really exciting story here. And it had that kind of mythic dimension that is always particularly exciting to us. So that's kind of how it all got started and how we first met Katya and Maurice.
Lovely, and I have a question later about just the experience of digging through that archive, but we'll come back to that. Daniel, I would love to hear how you first became interested in Alexei, and what led you to want to make this film about him and with him.
Well, I remember it was the summer of 2020, and I was at home in Toronto, and I was painting the wall of my apartment, and I was listening to the radio, and there was this extraordinary story of this Russian opposition guy, Alexei Navalny, who at that moment was lying in a hospital room somewhere in Siberia, apparently poisoned, and the Russian government wouldn't let him leave. And there was this sort of standoff taking place. And I registered that story. I knew who this guy was. Cut to 2.5 months later. My colleagues and I are working on a completely different film. And Odessa and I find ourselves in Kyiv. We're with Christo Grozev, one of the investigative journalists in our movie who we profile. And that film project, which is completely different, is not going well. And we are very assertively encouraged to leave the country. So we find ourselves in Vienna, Austria. I think it's October of 2020. And Christo comes in for a meeting one morning. I'm disheveled and frustrated. I don't have a film to make. It's the middle of a pandemic. I just keep hitting dead ends. And he sits down and he says, we can't go back to Kiev. That film's finished. But there's something else you might be interested in. And I was furious. I was so frustrated and anxious. And I said, what, Christo? What is it? And I'll never forget, he sort of leans in like he's telling me a state secret. And he says, you know that Navalny guy? I think I have a lead into who tried to poison him. And if it was a cartoon, my ears would have shot out and a light bulb would have appeared above my head. And I popped up from my chair and I said, Christo, who's making that movie? Let's go make that movie. And he says, okay, should I reach out to him? I was like, yeah, reach out to him. And a week later, we snuck across the German-Austrian border. Europe was closed from the pandemic. And we went to pitch Alexei. And I had about 5 days to fully orient myself in everything I could about this guy, Russian politics, the history of the Soviet Union, everything. And I just had to be conversationally fluent to be able to sit across from him and pitch him on not just why I should make a film about him, but why we should make a film in general. I had to convince him as to why the medium mattered to him and he should take it seriously. And in that first meeting, as we were sitting across from the leader of the Russian opposition, who had recently awoken from his coma, we were able to convince him, and we started shooting the film the next day.
And I would love to hear, I think, some folks here might be very familiar with these processes, but for the general public, I love the idea of demystifying the producing process for everyone, because I think that sometimes it's shrouded in mystery and there's not quite a concrete way of identifying what's done, the work of a producer. And so I would love to start with the Navalny team and hear from the producers about how you first came on board and started working with your filmmaker, and what key role you played in starting the film or getting the film finished.
Well, I was on that crazy ride with Daniel. We were working in Kiev. We got kicked out. We ended up in Vienna. We got a meeting, and there was really no question. We just sort of went for it, and every day was absolutely exhausting. We embedded with Navalny and the family and had to basically just handle everything and do everything. And Di can continue.
You were on the ground. We were in LA wondering if you were safe. And, at the end of 2020, when it became clear we had enough material to make a movie, the second question was like, how quickly can we make it, and how much money is it going to cost, and can we get it done independently or whatnot? And it was at a time when, we talked to a sales agent and they said, I don't think anyone's going to really touch this, maybe one or two places. And so we had a meeting and we were kind of reverse engineering it and going, well, what is the goal of this film? And the goal was to get the film done as quickly as possible to, spread Alexei's story, and also to give ourselves a platform to make sure that we had a place that would be able to distribute it properly. The Dissident had come out that year and it had its own difficulties. So, we just kept coming back to CNN, and CNN had been reporting on the story and was very, aware of it, obviously. So, we were just like, let's contact, Amy Antelis, Courtney Sexton, Alex Hannibal, and Ryan Robinson at CNN and see what they think. And we had a meeting with them, and the rest is history, as they say, in that respect.
I was definitely in charge of asking a lot of security questions. We definitely used encrypted messaging the entire time. We actually moved our edit around a lot on purpose. Just the way we were encrypting drives and going to different countries to actually edit. And, I joke, but by the time we actually had gotten into Sundance, and then we were working with CNN, which is also HBO Max, but then also kind of translates to part of Warner Brothers, the head of security for forensic marking at Warner Brothers offered me a job because of all the questions that I had kind of run through with them to make sure that things were done properly. So, we kind of all take different roles in this process, and this is where I will hand it off to Shane, because he was a massive part of the producing process as well.
Thanks. Yeah. I met Daniel in Toronto maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and then was reintroduced to him thanks to Sara 3 years ago. I then connected Daniel in Odessa, who we met thanks to Film Independent. I met Diane and Mel thanks to Sundance and Kristen Feely in particular. We sort of assembled this really incredible team from early on, and I was sort of the last one to really fully come on board to this film. I am a slow processor. It took me a while to sort of understand it didn't take me any time at all to understand the importance of the film, but it took me some time to understand if anything, if there were any gifts that I had to give to this film. But from early on, when Daniel and Odessa were in the field, Daniel and I were having many conversations about the kinds of questions we would be asking Alexei. And then from that point on, I started to contribute to the team, both, I think strategically and helping to listen to what the film could be in its fullest potential, and try and always incorporate and actualize the vision of the film back into the film.
Great. And would you like to also speak on Fire of Love and your role producing, and then perhaps we can hear from Ina also.
Yeah, sure. Sara and I have worked in different capacities on 5 or 6 films. And so when this idea for Fire of Love, when we started to discuss it, we were just blown away. I think, there, as Sara was saying earlier, there's a part in the end of the film where we understand the love triangle between Maurice, Katya, and the volcanoes. When we heard that, we sort of had a structure for the film. Sara and I early on went on a kind of writing retreat to set up a treatment for the film and a little structure that was then taken to extraordinary places by Aaron Casper and Jocelyn Chaput, our editors. And Ina and I had worked on a previous project called Stray, and we assembled again this incredible team. And I think for Fire of Love, it was a different process, but equally creative in the sense of trying to search through the material and discover what the story could be, and really, again, listening to Maurice and Katya as our guides and following both the facts of their lives as we understood it, but also working to fill in some of the gaps that didn't exist in the archive to tell the sort of mythic quality of their story.
And I came on board, as Shane said, because we had known each other through Stray, and I was a very big fan of Sara's previous film, Seer in the Unseen. Thought it was absolutely, magnificent. And I speak French, and one of the challenges, of course, of the film was finding the archive and also negotiating for the archive, which was in this really wonderful archive house in the southwest of France, in Nancy. And the family had, in particular, the brother who we've met since, and Sara has spoken with many times, Bertrand Kraft, had bestowed this archive, their archive, the 200 hours, to this small house who had taken care of it for many years. So they had only sold or given parts of the archives to various filmmakers. They'd never had given the opportunity to a filmmaker and film team to actually make a film about the crafts. So that was my first contribution, and then of course we ended up doing a lot of the post-production in Canada, and many of our team members are actually coming here to the Oscars. Our sound team, we did the post, our archival producing came from Canada too, from Montreal. And as you know, we're a French-speaking community, even though my first language is English. So many of us have worked in English and French, and this was kind of a natural fit. And I think it was a beautiful team, with Aaron and Jocelyn and Elijah and Sarah and Shane and our team in Montreal. It was really something magical and an honor to be part of this.
Thank you so much. Monica, I would love to hear about how you first got involved in working on Housemaid of Splinters.
So this is our fourth film together. We started nearly 10, 12 years ago working on your first film, and Simon has made now 4 films about children and the things children are facing and have to overcome. So I've been part of it from the very beginning, and I thought it was such a good idea to carry on working within Ukraine, because this is where his previous film, The Distant Barking of Dogs, took place. And also we were able to work with the same team again. So we had a Ukrainian team, Asad Safaro and Lena. And also they were filming there, and we also worked. I think that's nice. I can hear some of you are working the same way. That it's collaborations that you carry on with. So for Distant Barking Dogs, and actually also the 2 other films about children, we worked with our Swedish producer Tobias Jansson, who's here today, and also with our Finnish producer Sami. And it's like a typical European co-production, and I had a Ukrainian producer as well that helped out with the Ukrainian parts of the filming. And then, of course, I think the biggest challenges with this film was that it's a film about vulnerable children, and you had to get all the permissions to film there, and making sure that you do everything in the right way. But because of Simon's experience with working with children, we've had a lot of experience from the previous film, so we just took it very slowly and got it in the right tempo.
Yes, and I would love to come back to hearing a little bit more about working with children. But for all the Beauty and the Bloodshed team of producers, which is all 4 of you, I would just love to hear about your individual involvement in the film.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you so much for having us. And it's great to be here with everybody. I've worked with Laura for a long time, and in 2019, when Nan and Laura, they had met before, but when they reconnected and we were all, everybody was kind of talking about this project that Nan and as she said, a few people had already started. Megan Kapler, who's a co-producer on the film and in the film, came to show us some footage, and she showed us a little bit of the footage they had of the private eye who was outside Nan's house, who was following them. And we saw that footage and the footage of the actions and the direct actions, and we just kind of, I was hooked. And I think, as you can see, it takes a really big team, and there's even more people. So I think a lot of producing is just trying to, coordinate with a really big, brilliant team, brilliant archival producers and co-producers, Shantia Virgan and Olivia Streisand, music supervisor Don Sutter-Medell, kind of at the last minute, adding the female treble track from the John Waters film. So things like that. Every little piece with so many moving parts and so many great people, just kind of making sure that we can get that all in and finish the film, which we did a couple times.
When you started this round of the conversation, you said the mystery of what does the producer do? And I always think one of the most fascinating things about it is every single producer here answers that completely differently. And it's probably the only job in the production that isn't tied to a very specific skill set or a guild guideline or a director, a cinematographer, a wardrobe supervisor, a props person or something. And I think the thing that's so fascinating about it is that everybody brings their own skill set to it and strengths. And then if you're lucky, you have great partners who enhance and make your weak areas stronger. And you bring your own kind of skill and empathy and emotion to it. And so every producer does the job differently. And when people say, what does a producer do? I think that's why people are mystified by the job. We were incredibly lucky to have a great group of people who all, I think, complemented and enhanced each other's skill sets. And we were awed by, devoted to, and loved Nan Goldin, which is easy to do, but it was a pleasure. Oh, I heard that. No, it was a pleasure to come together and tell this story.
And I think just to add to this, sometimes filmmaking is about like finding your community and finding your tribe as you make your way up. And we met Nan actually interviewing her for another film that John and I are making with Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman about Nan's friend, Peter Hujar, the amazing photographer. And so Peter led us to Nan. And after that interview, Nan said, you know, I'm working on my own film with Pain, and I could use your advice. And since Nan is our hero, we were like, of course. And so we started talking to her about her film. And you know, I've known John for like over 20 years from when I was just starting out, but I've also known Laura for that long when we were both working on the show Split Screen for IFC. And Nan happened to see Laura a few days after the Hujar, the interview about Peter, and mentioned the movie. And then Laura emailed me and said, hey, like I hear you're talking to Nan, and you know, then I'd be interested in directing. So it came, and with Yoni, it came together in a very organic, community-orientated way with a lot of love, and that's the movie.
I'm just the subject. I have no idea what a producer does. None. So I guess they organize everything. They raise the money. They keep it going. I've got very close to Howard and John, and love them dearly. And you know, it wasn't an easy film for anybody, honestly. So we made it through, and yeah, I hope to keep working with them. So I'm not really a producer. I'm an editor. And I brought in my friend Soundwalk to compose the score, and I actually worked in the studio in Berlin with them on the score. So I got involved in every part of the film, and I'm proud of that.
I'm hearing a lot of support system. I think that's kind of a common thing. But Aman and Teddy, I would love to hear how you provided a support system for your filmmaker. And I know that you, Shaunak, you were also a producer on this film too, so if you'd like to speak to that as well.
So Shaunak and I had met, well, we've known each other pretty much our entire adult lives, and we'd worked together on his first film. So when he had this idea inspired by this whole concept of the texture of Delhi's air, we just began working together at that point. And on our first film, we hadn't produced it. And then the problem was that we didn't really have much of a say in terms of how we could distribute it or in terms of fundraising. So here we just decided that we were going to produce this. And it's, well, almost like a little bit of an accident, because I think I end up with the producer title because I know how to work Excel.
Spreadsheets, yes.
But then for the first year, we had like a really tiny team. Often it was just Shaunak and me. He was shooting, I was doing sound, and just building that relationship with our characters. And then 2 other members of the same directing team from the first film. And then we'd put together like a reel or a compilation of our footage, which we were sending to grants and forums. And then we got really lucky because Teddy and Flory and his team from Rice Films found us at a point late in development, and then they reached out to us and just really helped us imagine a different scale for the film in terms of who else we could collaborate with, in terms of how differently we could fundraise, and that really just began the process of taking it to a different level.
Well, I'm glad we did find you, and that's credit to my amazing team at Rise. And I came into the film as a result of an extraordinary conversation with Shaunak. I'd seen a clip of some of the stuff that Shaunak and Aman had been filming for the several months prior, and then we got on a Zoom early in the pandemic, and I had a sort of a singularly amazing conversation with the director, and I hadn't really had a conversation like this in my career, where the specificity of the plan was so clear, and the ambition for what he wanted to do, subject to getting the resource to do it, was so clear and impressive, and we just jumped right in, and it was an extraordinarily difficult project to raise money for, because it is so extremely execution dependent. I mean, we got there in the end, but it was not easy, and I think that it just wasn't an easy one to see the vision for, and I think financiers were scared of it, didn't think it was terribly commercial, and we needed to find people sort of brave enough to go for it, which we eventually did in Tanglebank Studios. And to John's point about what does a producer do, I sort of feel like I fulfill a different role on every film. On this, it was sort of a bit of everything. I wasn't involved in the shoot because it was in the midst of the pandemic. I was in London, they were in Delhi, but this was a project where I was working with two of the best producers in Shaunak and Aman that I've ever worked with. Incredibly strategic, brilliant thinkers who made me a better producer, and it's a huge honor to have worked on it.
And Shaunak, I would love, the film has such an incredible visual language that I know took a while for you to develop. We have these locked off, very weighted and grounded shots, but we also have this beautiful panning and tilting that's almost otherworldly or kind of dreamlike. And so I'm curious how you came to develop that visual language, because I know that what we see on screen is not necessarily the way that you were shooting the film to begin with.
Well, for one, I think it's a function of time. You just keep shooting. And we shot for 3 years. And, like I keep saying that can I just say, I feel like all of us have heard each other's answers for so long that we can just answer for each other. But
we can try that if you want.
We could actually.
Let's do it.
Daniel, do you want to take this answer?
Let's do that.
What was the question again?
How did I arrive at the style?
The visual style.
Well, should I answer in the first person? Yeah. I was very interested in exploring this film cinematically. I wanted to do something that felt like fiction. And I think one of the most important tools here was time, and how we massage time and the patience. And I knew that in order to do this, we would have to utilize the tools of fiction filmmaking. So we see in the basement a lot of slides, a lot of motivated pans and tilts. And it was very important to us that we just had that consistent visual style. But ultimately, this is a film that takes place on the lateral, on the horizontal. We are enclosed in this basement until we see the epic expanse of the skies of Delhi. And it's those contrasting back and forths that really empowered and emboldened our cinematic process.
How did he do?
It was perfect. In fact, I was drawing while he was talking. But yeah, that was perfect.
I forgot to say the word modelin. That's Shaunak's favorite word.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No.
All right, I'm going to get this back on track and move to All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. And I'm really curious in, this is more of a question for Laura, but I think the group can answer it as you see fit. We do have a confluence of subjects. We have Nan, the artist. We have pain and their activism and their direct actions, and we have a nation in the throes of an opioid crisis. And so I think what I gained from watching this film is just how wonderfully executed, how wonderfully woven these three subjects are together in a way that feels so cohesive. And so I'm curious how you all arrived at balancing those different but also again converging subjects and ideas.
You missed one of the major subjects of the film,
which is
my childhood.
Your childhood.
And suburbia and my sister's suicide.
Yes.
That's as important as all the other elements that you mentioned.
Correct. Yes.
One of our editors, Joe Beanie, was actually really instrumental. After the first stage of a documentary, every documentary gets to its locked picture in different ways. But one of our first stages was looking at the footage, as Yoni was saying, the present-day footage that Nan and Megan and Payne had shot, and also looking through the archival witnesses against our vanishing, in particular. And there was this amazing footage of Nan organizing the show itself, of David Wojnarowicz. And I guess I can speak for Laura to say, she saw that sequence and saw in it the heart of so many other things that we would want to talk about in the film. And so at a certain point, Joe put together this structure on paper that interwove all those different stories, and that's where that sort of crafting started, and it was magical.
Joe Beanie has a history of that. He edited Grizzly Man. He edited We Need to Talk About Kevin. And his way of editing, if We Need to Talk About Kevin had been a straight narrative, it would not have had the power. That him withholding things, and then we see something, he reveals something and then he withholds, and it made it much more intense. And so I feel like he was the perfect editor for this material. And making chapters with names. I mean, it was genius.
I think we probably all went through a variation of this experience, is that we started really filming intensively, and then we were hit by the pandemic. And sometimes the most profound things are the simplest things. And Laura had the inspiration of saying, okay, if we can't film, how do we keep the life of this film alive? And she said, Nan, I want to come to your apartment and we'll be safe and socially distanced, and let's just talk. I mean, to me, the real organizing principle of this film is always Nan's voice. That voice, that voice coming alive in the film and weaving the political activism, the historical truths, the opioid crisis, the AIDS epidemic, but the profundity of that moment in post-war America where so many assumptions were made that were so wrong and so crippling and so devastating. And I don't think we would have ever gotten to that if Laura hadn't said, Nan, I want to just come and talk to you every week. It's a simple thing, but it's a huge thing for this film.
I have to, give homage to Laura, because she did something documentary filmmakers don't normally do, which was kept her word about my role in the film. I mean, maybe they do, but I also know that they don't sometimes. So she did these really intensive interviews that were like, therapy without a therapist. And I only did them on the condition that I would have some control over what was used. And she actually allowed that, which was crucial for my involvement in the film and my acceptance of the film. And she also found the primary documents of I turned over the primary documents of my sister's institutional history, and that's where that incredible title came from. It's from Rorschach test that they showed to my sister, and she said, "I see all the beauty in the bloodshed." And it's an incredible title that Laura found.
Absolutely. For the Housemaid of Splinters team, I want to come back to something you brought up earlier, and that's working with children. And this is not, as you mentioned, your first film in which you've had that experience, but specifically in this shelter, you possibly weren't sure how long you would have with each of these subjects, and so being able to gain their trust so quickly. I just wanted to ask you how you approached that so empathically.
There's a very complicated answer to this, of course, but I think, for example, one of the more important parts is that I do my own cinematography and my own sound. So it's actually just me and the set there most of the time. And I think for both of us, we just try to be as honest and as open to the kids as we can, and being really interested in seeing them as the small, beautiful beings, individual beings that they are, their hopes and their dreams and their fears, but also respecting their boundaries. So, letting them know that if there's something you don't want us to film, you just put up your hand or say stop, or you walk away. And in those incidents where those things happen, I'm a man of my word, so to speak. Even if it might be a good scene, I still stop it. And over time, I don't hurry it, maybe, and that's one of the reasons also. It has to come by itself, that mutual trust that develops between us. Kind of become one with the world, that we're almost like we're one of the staff, and we spend a lot of time, just joking around with the kids and understanding everything about their reality. So when the more raw emotional moments happened, to be respectful of that also, and not to be too greedy, so to speak, because as a documentarist, you know when really important stuff happens, it's so crucial that you capture this. But I try to remind myself all the time when this happened to lay down the camera. The second I just think I might have the scene, that's when I stop filming. And I stay behind so that if they want, a hug, or if they just want to take a walk or something like this, then I'm also there. Yeah, I guess that's part of the answer. Yeah, and also we worked really closely with the caregivers, because they've done this for a long time, and it's important to understand how things work in a place like this and how to communicate also with the children. It's also very important, for example, for us to set our own barriers, to let them know we are not here to adopt you, to be open and frank about these things from the very beginning. So they taught us a lot, also to bottle your own feelings when it gets tough, because what the child needs is the adults to be in some semblance of stability and control. So you can go home and cry later, but for now it's the kids that it's about their life and their feelings. So be there for them instead. Yeah.
Thank you. And for Sara and the Fire of Love team, once you did get access to this footage, can you describe a bit the experience of just combing through a physical film archive? And I know Maurice would say that he wasn't a filmmaker, but he absolutely was. And so some of this footage was conformed into finished works that he would then travel with for fundraising. But what was it like to look through some of that unconformed footage and create your own vision with it?
It was absolutely beguiling and enchanting to look through the craft archive. There was about 200 hours of 16mm footage that Katya and Marie shot, and hundreds of thousands of still photographs that Katya took. And I remember the very first set of images I saw was from Mauna Loa erupting in 1984, which were downloaded from an FTP site in kind of the fall of 2020, just feeling so isolated and alone in those months of the pandemic, and just looking at them and feeling the lava is alive. Like, this is truly a sentient being that I'm seeing here. It was so powerful, and it told me so much, not just about how the planet works, but also Katyn Maurice's gaze, the fact that the Earth was not something to be conquered. It was something to be centered and celebrated in its full and resplendent power. And that coursed through every image that they took. It was extremely challenging, though. And my editors, Aaron Casper and Jocelyn Chaput, need to be just celebrated and praised for their extraordinary work, because the imagery, it was so beautiful, but it was, Aaron often jokes that it feels like it was put into a blender and you hit puree. So there's like a 2-second shot, a 4-second shot, a 7-second shot, maybe if we're lucky, and often out of order. Even though the archival house took beautiful care of the imagery, it was extremely difficult to piece together. But kind of the complexity and the, at times, confusion of what was kind of laid out for us taught us so much about how to actually put together the film. We had so many questions. You know, why is this shot, you know, of an erupting volcano next to a shot of a monitor lizard eating a dead animal? And that made us realize Katyn and Maurice were in search of these, they were asking these questions themselves. This was a film about meaning, and it was a film about the unknown, whether it's about the unknown forces of our planet or the unknowns of the human heart. And so we really embraced that kind of question asking in our own storytelling. And so what started out as these extreme challenges became gifts. So I could go on and on about those unknowns, but do you want to add anything?
That's about as good as it gets. I think you know, just to prove how slow I am as a processor, I will say one more thing about the producing process and what came up quite a bit in our conversation before, and I will tie it back into Fire of Love, just to give you all a preface of what's going to happen right now. There really is there's a reflexivity and a relationality to producing, and it's an honor to be here on the stage with everybody, because you know, when we are all trying in our lives, I think, to give what we have to give in this life, and we are only able to do it thanks to the people and living beings in this world. Because, you know, a producer, if their job is to help a director actualize a vision, needs a vision. If there's a vision from a director, they need someone who can help them actualize it. When you have a story like Maurice and Katya's, there is this myth, and there is this quest for the unknown, but you need that myth to be made. You need that quest, you need that story to be told. And I think there is an incredible process and relationship that emerges when you are going through that archive, because you are, even though in our case we're dealing with people who died almost or over 30 years ago, you also have a relationship with them, and you feel this incredible sense of connectivity, and where questions are being asked and answered, and there's a speaking through place and time and our concepts of life and death. That's really profound, and meaning is made in that process. And so the film that's ultimately put forth exists forever, but there's also a constant, timeless relationship that's really beautiful in the filmmaking process.
Thank you for sharing that. And I am being given the signal that we are just about at time, but I did have one last question for the NAVALNY team, and specifically for Daniel, if you would like to answer it. I'm just so curious about, you know, and this is a question I wish I had time to ask everyone, but unfortunately we are short for time. When we talk about filmmaking, especially in the past 15 years or so, we talk a lot about impact and the impact that a film can have in society, right? But what I'm curious is less about sort of the broad message or the social impact of the film that you've made, and more what you hope your audience takes away from the film when they've seen it. What is that, the small sort of piece of inspiration or activism that you hope a single person in your audience will take away with them after they've seen your film?
Well, this is a very serious question, or otherwise I would have thrown it over to Shaunak. But I think I'll answer that. You know, when we released this film, when it premiered, the war started 3 weeks later, or the escalation, rather, of the war. And what we had was this, what we thought was a prescient film, and it was just thrusted to a new level of relevance and importance. And ultimately, as we worked hard and fast to get this film out into the world, it was motivated by the understanding that Navalny remained in peril. We made a film, excuse me, that doesn't have a happy ending. Right now, Alexei Navalny is in a little cell that's 2 meters by 3 meters. He's essentially being tortured in prison, and it's clear that the Kremlin is trying to break his body, mind, and spirit. They're trying to murder him slowly. And I felt a great deal of guilt associated with that, because here I was taking this film around the world, getting to go to so many extraordinary places, and it's predicated on this guy who I cared about languishing in these torturous conditions. And that was very challenging. But ultimately, we understood that Navalny was going to go back to Russia no matter what. But by being there and bearing witness, we had no delusions that we would create a structural change or get him out of Russia. You know, Laura Poitras, who's such an inspiration for me, so often talks about the limitations of film's ability to make structural changes. But in spite of that, we understood that keeping Navalny in the global consciousness mattered. Keeping his family in the global consciousness and his plight and his mission in the global consciousness mattered. So I think more than anything, I hope that our film, what it's achieved, is keeping Navalny's name and plight reverberating throughout the world. And my ultimate dream and aspiration is that one day, in the hypothetical Russia of the future, when Vladimir Putin is no longer the president and this war is over, I can go to Moscow and I can rent a cinema and I can show Alexei our movie. And that's my dream for the future and what I really hope to do one day.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I really wish we had more time. I have so many more questions for each and every one of you. But I want to thank you again for being here and congratulate you all on your nomination for an Academy Award. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our audience for joining for this conversation today.